Welcome to episode 6 of the Cine Skills School video camera course, and today, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we are outdoors. When it comes to filmmaking or videography of any kind, the sun is your best friend, and there's a few reasons why. We'll go over in this video how to position the sun, how to use the shade to your advantage, where to place your subject relative to the sun, different angles you can take based on the sort of setting that you're given, and a bunch of other foundational rules and principles that actually apply, once you hit that record button. So today, obviously, we're going over outside. Next video will be indoors, but a lot of the foundational rules and principles that we learn here in this video will translate to the next one as well. So make sure you guys pay attention, take notes on all these different foundational rules and stuff that I'm going to give you as best you can, and I'll try to keep things, as organized as possible while still providing, plenty of real-world examples for you guys to look at. So with that being said, before I go ahead and talk about the sunlight, which is the foundation of shooting outside, let's just talk about some of the key rules that you want to pay attention to when filming anything, anywhere. So the number one most famous rule when it comes to camera work is the rule of thirds. And this is the first thing that I recommend you learn in terms of knowing how to position your subject, where to place them, how to frame the shot, how to angle the camera. A lot of it stems from the rule of thirds, and that's sort of the textbook starting point that's going to help you sort of guide your shots before you really have that sort of natural instinct as to, okay, this is what I want it to look like. The rule of thirds is simply just a grid that goes over your camera, and it gives you 4 intersecting points. Those 4 intersecting points are the perfect places for subject placement. So if you're shooting a product, an item, an object, a person, a face, anything, those 4 intersection points are usually one of the spots where it's going to look pretty good to place that subject. Now, this will depend on the angle that you take. So you don't just want to pick one of those random 4 intersections for no rhyme or reason. You want to take into account, okay, what's the angle I want to take here? Do I want to capture a straight on angle where the background, or if there was a wall behind me, which technically I guess you could say there's a fence behind me, that fence is the flat background that's behind me. And because this is a more educational tutorial style video, I've chosen to place myself in the center, so I'm the center of attention. You guys are actually, connecting with me and listening to what I'm saying. I'm not highlighting the beauty of what's going on behind me over myself. I'm the key part of this video. I'm the one that's teaching the course, and I have a lot to say here that I want you guys to hopefully listen to. So I'm going to position myself in the center and sort of, direct your center of attention there. Now, these sort of flat 2D style shots can work for cinematic use cases as well, not just like a talking head coaching style video like this. There are plenty of shots from movies and stuff where this exact sort of setting is being used. The subject will be in the center, and maybe they'll be walking on a sidewalk or something like that, and the camera will keep them in the center and just sort of pan, across the road, and you'll see them walking down the sidewalk, and the buildings create that sort of flat 2D sort of Super Mario Brothers style look to the shot. Now, there's a few things you want to do to get the best results when you're using this kind of angle. Number one, you want to have a lot of separation between yourself, the subject, and the background. Now, in my case, I've achieved this perfectly. The fence is way back there, probably 20, 30 feet behind me, and I've placed myself nice and close to the camera relative to that fence that's way back there. And that's one of the things that's giving me that very blurry background. The second thing that's making that background nice and blurry is the fact that my aperture is wide open to as much as it will go, down to f2.8. And we'll talk about more about aperture and how to use it outside later in the video. By ensuring that I'm going to get that background blur with the distance between me and the background and the aperture, I've sort of given myself the best possible look I can get with a very 2D flat style shot like this. Now, another thing that's catering to the fact that this shot looks well lit and well exposed and stuff like that. It doesn't look like the sun is beating down on me, even though it's basically the middle of the afternoon and the sun is at the top of the sky. This is the time of day where you really shouldn't film outside, because you don't want the sun to be all the way at the top of the sky and be at its most intense part of the day. This is just going to make everything that's lit up by the sun way too harsh and overexposed. And when it's at the top of the sky rather than lower in the sky, when the sun is, shooting its light straight down, there's no room for anything to develop any shadows, right? The light is not being cast into a certain direction. There's no shadows in the middle of the day. So everything you try to capture just looks very flat and sort of evenly lit. And that even lighting is not just even lighting, but it's even lighting that's too bright, so it's even worse. So how is it that I'm filming at 12 o'clock noon right now and the shot looks pretty decent? Well, it's not only because of the angle I'm taking and the fact that I have that background separation, but it's because I know how to position the sun appropriately and also how to use the shade to my advantage. Now, I have this nice awning above my head right now that's protecting me from that direct top-down light, and I've chosen to sit in this exact spot for that reason. And it's actually not quite 12 o'clock yet, it's more like 11:40. So the sun is actually not quite at the top of me, it's actually up to my left and then a bit back. And that's exactly where I positioned it. So it's sort of at this portion, this region of the sky up here, even though it's sort of being shielded by the awning that's directly overhead. And what's happening, hopefully, I'm sort of losing the effect as the minutes and hours go by, but if I were to actually film this earlier in the morning, this effect would be even more pronounced. But what I'm trying to do is capture a little bit of that sunlight and glare on the back left portion of my head here, maybe on a little bit of this side of my face. I'm not sure, you guys will have to tell me when you're looking at this. But the key is the sun is not in front of my face casting light directly onto my face. My face is not the brightest part of this image. It's not what's, most lit up and exposed. It's well worth the sacrifice to have your subject be a bit dark, maybe be a bit in the shadows, so that way you make sure that the bright portions of the frame are not way too bright and overdone. And by having that sun behind me, even though it's above, it's not low in the sky, but it is still behind my head rather than in front of my head, you're getting that sort of that glow behind the character's face, behind their head. And the most famous movie example that I can think of to really showcase this is Dune Part 2. If you guys have watched Dune Part 2, you probably appreciated how beautiful that movie was. A large chunk of that is because of the fact that it was shot not only in natural sunlight and stuff like that, with no artificial LEDs and stuff being used, it's all naturally lit, that movie. But the key is the way that the cinematographer positioned the sun relative to the subject's head. You can see every time they do one of these close-up shots of someone's head, they have this glow and this outline around their hair and their head that sort of provides this sort of glowing aura. But the face is sort of shaded and very natural looking. It doesn't look like there's a light casting on their face, because there's not. The sun is just off behind them, and it's just shot at the perfect part of the day where it's going to create the most pleasing look. Usually that's early in the morning right after the sun rises, or later in the day right before it sets. If you go ahead and shoot at those times, and then you also apply all these foundations, like the positioning of the sun behind the head, making sure you're not just going outside and saying, oh, okay, it's good lighting, it's sunset right now, let me just shoot, with no rhyme or reason. You still have to position that sun. You still have to make sure that the subject placement is proper, and that you're getting that sun in the proper portion of the frame. Do you want the sun to be in the frame? Do you want the sun to be out of the frame? What time of day do you want it to appear like in the film? You may shoot at early in the morning, but you want it to appear like it's middle of the afternoon. But you're going to shoot at 9 a.m. because you're going to get that really pleasing looking light. And you can do other things in the film or in the sort of storyline to sort of portray that it's a later time of day, right? So there's different things that are going to go into the entire picture of the project that you're working on, rather than just, pressing the record button and shooting it. But for you, the person that will be pressing that record button and shooting it, you may not be responsible for all those other things, or maybe you're just doing YouTube content, you don't care about cinematic work and stuff like that. That's fine. Just make sure that if you're shooting outside, shoot at the proper time of day, early in the morning or later in the evening, right before sunrise and sunset. That's the best chance you're going to get. And when you do so, position that sun behind the subject's head, off to either the right or the left side, but behind. And you can take that flat 2D angle we talked about, or what I like to do in a situation where I want things to maybe look a bit more three-dimensional, a bit more grand, a bit more dramatic. What I would do is, instead of placing my subject right in the center all the time and just having a, profile shot of their head for every single shot, get some different angles of your subject, get a wide shot of them, get more medium shots of only the chest or torso, and then get tighter shots of maybe only the head. Get both sides of the subject's face, position them different ways and in different positions relative to the sun. And also another tip, just to spice things up and give it a bit more of a cinematic flair, is 9 out of 10 times, if you're using natural lighting, you're outdoors, you're getting a wide shot, medium shot, tight shot, for all those 3 shots, no matter what the situation, go lower, get a low angle. Now, you don't have to get right down to the floor, but 9 times out of 10, a lower angle is gonna look really, really cinematic, because your eyes typically, you don't get to see that angle in real life. It's sort of a different perspective than most people would see. Think of the height that maybe a dog would see the world at, right? A dog that's like 2 feet tall, 2.5 feet tall, whatever. The perspective that they see the world at, a lot of times it just looks very cinematic for some reason. Or if you want your subject to appear kind of like heroic, that's also a great angle you can take, is just get low to the ground. You don't have to be so extreme with it and get all the way to the floor. Sometimes just going below the eye line of the subject is enough to pull that off. But again, just play with it. Your taste and your style is going to develop over time, and you'll sort of get a feel for, okay, I really like these low angle shots, and you start using them more. Now, on shots where it's not going to be so flat and two-dimensional, where your fence isn't just a flat horizontal line behind your subject, and you want to just sort of capture a more angular type of angle, something with diagonal lines, and that's going to maybe look like you're off in the corner, right? rather than just looking flat straight on. When you take that type of approach, that's what those vertical lines of the rule of thirds are for. So what you want to do is, perfect example I have, even though this isn't an outdoor shot, so don't crucify me guys, but this B-roll shot of my lenses that you guys saw me use in the second episode of this course, I'm going to bring one of them back up right now to show you how I position the lens and why. So in this shot here, I have my subject, the lens, on the bottom right intersection that we talked about. That's one of those 4 intersections. And the reason I have it on the bottom right is because I'm sort of at that angle where that's appropriate to place it there. I know that's real helpful, right? I'm holding my camera facing the lens, and what I've done is I've angled myself looking out to the left. So just mirror my movements with me real quick for a second. You're holding your camera, right? Let's say this is my camera, and my lens is out in front of me on the table, right? What I've done is, instead of shooting at the lens straight on, I've taken more of an angle like this. And because I'm pointed to the left, right, that means that I'm going to put my subject to the right. Now, if I were to point myself to the right and take that right diagonal angle, then I would put my subject on the left vertical line, right? And the reason we're doing that is because when you take that approach, if you were to use a person, for example, rather than an inanimate object, a person has a face, right? So I can face forwards, or I can face to the side, or I can face to this side. So if I were to move over this way on my chair and just sort of face out this way, you guys can see that now I'm on the left vertical line of the rule of thirds grid. If I were to overlay a grid here, and I'm on that left vertical and I'm looking out this way. All the space, the open space of the frame is out in front of me, you see? Now, if I keep this same angle, I'm looking out to my left, right? But I put myself on the other vertical line, I put myself on the right side, this looks a bit awkward because now all the extra space, the side of the frame where there's more open space, is behind me. And that just looks weird, doesn't look right. But if I face this way, it looks right again. So you guys can see that approach that I'm taking when I'm shooting the lens there. Because I've decided to angle myself pointed out to the left, I'm going to place the lens or the subject on that right vertical line. And because my camera is sort of like directly in line with the tabletop and the subject itself, I'm not sort of getting a lot lower than it to give it that heroic look. I'm not really doing that here. I'm just getting sort of a very straight on angle to that tabletop. And that's why I've said to myself, okay, I'm going to put it on the lower portion of the frame. Now, if I were taking that really low angle and getting that heroic shot, I want it to look, you know, all grand and mighty, I would get low and I'd probably place it on the top intersection instead of the bottom one. And that's just, I think, going to look much more aesthetically pleasing. But again, you guys can play around with those 4 intersections, mess around with them, and play around with the placement of your subject. It's all about trial and error, guys. You guys can hear me, you know, hammer home as many of these textbook rules as possible. And while they're all great and super important to understand and master, the key is really to know once you get to the point where you're able to break them, and not break them out of lack of knowledge or experience, but break them out of full knowledge and experience, out of full understanding and comprehension of what you're doing, and saying, okay, yeah, this is a textbook rule, but my natural creative instinct is telling me that I can break this rule and sort of adjust this, and that's going to give it a unique edge and a unique factor that I think people will notice and appreciate. Another thing I want to talk about real quick is the difference between A-roll and B-roll. A-roll is the shots like this one right here, where I'm actually talking to the camera, to a microphone, and the audio will be attached to this video clip. So this video clip has audio clip with me talking, and if I were to remove that audio, you'd be like, what the hell, what am I watching? Now, the B-roll clips, they don't have to have audio. B-roll clips are just sort of little demonstrational shots that sort of back up the things you're talking about. So you guys have been seeing them all throughout this video, all throughout the course. Every time I say something that I want you guys to see with your eyes, and I don't want you to just watch me speak it out loud, I want you guys to actually see an example. I want to back up and really hammer home what I'm talking about. I'll provide a visual context, a visual example through a B-roll clip. Now, when it comes to B-roll, I really try to take the time and effort into making the shots look as beautiful as possible, especially if you're going to be demonstrating different products and stuff for your business or something like that. If you're a small business owner, you have anything that you're trying to promote in terms of a product or service or something like that. If you're using B-roll shots that don't look great, it's not going to have the same effect. It's not going to have that same professionalism to it. So as long as you're capable of setting up one really good looking talking shot like this, where you're using those key principles of lighting, of background separation, of all the things we talked about, and you can sort of keep that one shot for the whole video like I'm doing here. But it'd be pretty boring if you guys were just staring at this one shot for however many straight minutes with no visual changes or interruptions or anything different to look at. And it would be a lot harder to learn if you couldn't see what I was trying to teach you, right? So B-roll is going to basically fill that void, and you can put much more of a cinematic emphasis on this compared to your talking shots, where it's not as important to be all cinematic when you're just trying to talk to people and maybe get a point across or teach them something. The B-roll shots is where you get the chance to really show off, practice your cinematography skills, and sort of demonstrate your level of professionalism. And some of the keys for B-roll shots is going to really play into the same things we've been talking about. If you're shooting a B-roll shot of an object or a product outdoors, like this for example, I'm going to take all those same principles of lighting and positioning of the sun that I was telling you guys earlier into account here with this shot, even though this isn't an A-roll talking shot with an actual human subject. And even though it's the middle of the day and the sun isn't quite as low in the sky as I would like it, I can really get some beautiful product shots out here in just my backyard by applying a lot of these principles that we've went over already. So I'm going to look up in the sky, I'm going to say to myself, okay, where is the sun? Let me position this subject and my camera so that the sun is going to be in the back and the product is going to be in between your camera and the sun. The product should be kind of like the monkey in the middle. And then I'm either going to get a two-dimensional flat shot where the subject is in the center and maybe I'll get a little bit lower than it, right? So it looks kind of heroic, like it's standing nice and tall and mighty in the center. Or I'm going to place the subject on one of the vertical lines and get a diagonal angle instead. And because this is an object that I want to really isolate, maybe it's a product that I'm doing for a company or something like that, and I want that to be, you know, the highlight of the video. What's going on in the background is not important. This video is a promo for this product, and that's the center of attention. And I can do that without putting the product directly in the center of the frame. I can have it on that vertical line, I can take that diagonal angle, but I'm going to use a tighter lens, right? I'm not going to use this ultra wide lens that makes the product look really tiny and insignificant. I want that product to fill the whole frame, to look nice and big and grand. I'm going to get a little bit lower than it so it maybe has that heroic stature to it. And I can decide from there, okay, do I want it flat on center? Do I want it to be diagonal on one of the vertical lines? And that right there is everything you need to account for before you press that button. Now it's just a matter of setting your settings appropriately, which we went over in the last couple videos. But in terms of actually putting those things in practice, you get outside, you set up your camera, you get all the angles and everything right, you have the tripod and the angle set exactly where you want it. Now it's a matter of, okay, let me make sure that focus and exposure is perfect. And for that, you just follow all of the principles and instructions from episode 4 of the course, which goes over all the different exposure settings. You get outside, you want to say to yourself, okay, it's daytime. That means there's no reason for me to use anything higher than my native ISO. So you can say that to yourself right off the bat. Don't change from that native ISO number. We went over that in episode 4. The native or base ISO is going to be the lowest ISO number that looks good on your camera. Your manufacturer will tell you. You can do a quick Google search to find this out. What is my camera's base or native ISO? You're outdoors in daylight, you want to use that number. Now you're going to say, okay, what am I shooting? Is it a commercial? Is it a cinematic project? Is it a YouTube video? Is it a B-roll clip? Am I doing some type of sports? Am I going to want to slow this down later in the editing to get some slow-mo effect on this or not? All those are going to take account into what frame rate you use. So you can decide that on your own, whether you use 24, 30, 60 FPS. And then for shutter speed, obviously, you're just setting it to double the number of the frame rate. And now your aperture is where you're going to get that fine tuning, right? So you're outside. If you have no ND filter or no sunglasses for your camera, an ND filter is basically a filter you screw on your lens, and it allows you to get your aperture wide open in direct sunlight. Think about it, right? You have no sunglasses on your lens, and it's just the lens capturing that harsh, bright sunlight. There's no way you can open that aperture all the way up and not be overexposed. Unless, of course, you purchase an accessory, of course, and screw it on your camera. It's called an ND filter. There's tons of them out there. I recommend getting one that's variable, and a variable one is gonna act like transition sunglasses. It's basically you twist the ring, and you can adjust the opacity or how much, shielding you're getting from the sun. So this is really nice because you can basically leave your camera settings at one preset setting and basically never touch it. So for example, I have my aperture right now is all the way open to 2.8, even though I'm outside in bright light. And that's because of the ND filter. And that's giving me the, the blurry background that I want. Without this ND filter, I'd be sacrificing that nice blurry background, which for this talking head style shot is kind of important thing that I want to get. And because I have that ND filter on and I know it's variable and I can basically twist and adjust it, my ND filter now essentially becomes my exposure adjustment. I can just leave everything wide open. I can leave the aperture wide open. I can leave my ISO at 400. I don't have to touch my frame rate or my shutter speed. I basically don't have to touch my settings for the entire project. And I can just use my ring on my ND filter to actually act as like a physical exposure adjustment. So that's really cool and really helpful. But what if you don't have an ND filter, or what about situations where you don't want the aperture to be wide open and you don't want things to be all blurry? Well, then obviously without the ND filter, you're gonna have to close that aperture down quite a bit to get proper outdoor exposure. In a lot of cases in bright sun, this is going to be something like f16, even f22, if your lens will allow you to close it down that much, but some only go to f16. More towards the evening, you'll find like f11 works really well, f9, f10, and then towards the sunset itself, or in shaded areas, a lot of time you want to go to like 5.6, f7, somewhere around there. Those are just quick numbers that I'll throw at you that are just sort of like standards that work in those situations. But this is where it comes in, paying attention to that histogram, paying attention to the exposure meter on your camera, and just dialing that aperture number until you get the exposure to be where you want it. And that's how you're going to expose an outdoor shot, whether you have an ND filter or not. It's really all about that aperture. If you have the ND filter, your life is really easy because you can open things all the way up. You can get any type of look you're going for, and all you got to do is just adjust a filter on your lens, basically, that's giving you actual physical like sunglasses over the lens. If you don't have that, you're gonna have to get used to shooting at much more closed apertures. And if you want blurry backgrounds, even if you're at an aperture like f11, f12, f16, it is possible, but you're gonna have to use a really, really tight telephoto lens. That's really the only way to do that. The focal length of your lens will also play a factor into the blurriness of the background. To an extent, it's not as important or dictative as the aperture is, but it is a factor. If you have a lens that's telephoto 85 millimeters, 135 millimeters, really tight zoomed in lens, no matter what aperture you shoot at, there's going to be a little bit of background blur. Now, a wider lens is much more difficult to get that blur. So if you have a 12 millimeter lens, for example, that's going to be really, really difficult to get a blurry background. 16 millimeters, going to be really difficult to get a blurry background. You're going to need a number like f.8 to get something that's really crispy and blurry with a lens like that. So a lot of times 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters, those medium focal lengths kind of work really good for either or, whether you want the blur or not. And the last thing I want to talk about before we get to the nighttime portion of this video is cinematic movements. That's going to carry over into the next video as well when we get indoors. Cinematic movements are so easy and simple, and there's really only a few foundational ones that ever get used, and there's reasons for that. So I'm going to use my phone here to just quickly demonstrate and show you guys what those movements are. So you have your introductory movements, or stuff that's done in the beginning to sort of introduce the scene, introduce the setting or character. And those are movements like a push in, a tilt up, or sometimes even a truck upwards to reveal. Now for closing the scene or concluding it, you're basically following the inverse. So you've got pull out, you've got a tilt down, or maybe a downwards trucking motion like this. And then there are some others that can be used in other situations as well, like strafing side to side. You have panning side to side, which is actually rotating. And then once you get a little more advanced with that, what you can do is start to combine two of these different movements. And I really would only recommend combining two of them, because once you start to try and combine three or more, it just gets wonky and doesn't look good. But combining two of them a lot of times looks really, really good. And the most basic way to do that is, for the introduction, you want to do a push in while also tilting up at the same time. So that would look something like this. You'd start pointing down and you would push in as you tilt up and reveal. And then for closing, it would be the opposite. So you start kind of pointing up and then you would have it reveal the subject and pull out. So those are two of the easiest like combos that you can kind of try. And those are really going to add a lot of dynamic looks to your footage and not just have everything be so still and stagnant all the time. And I know it sounds silly, but guys, practice those movements, because it actually does require quite a considerable amount of core strength and balance to really execute those movements well and know what you're doing. You're going to want to get in a bit of an athletic stance and really kind of bend your knees a little bit, keep that back straight, engage your core, and just relax and exhale as you push forward, things like that. It is important because it does go a long way in the quality of the movement. And if you don't have a stabilized camera, or your stabilization's not that great, that's going to be a pretty big factor in determining how good your footage looks. So I think that we covered all the foundational elements of shooting outdoors in terms of lighting, in terms of setting the exposure. We went over a couple of other foundations that'll apply indoors and outdoors as well. But before we go ahead and get indoors in the next video, I want to quickly make it nighttime so that I can show you guys a few different tips and stuff for shooting in low light outdoors. Because once we lose that sun, that's it. We're kind of screwed. We might as well be shooting in a dark room. So there's going to be a few different principles at night that are going to come into play in terms of your camera settings, as well as using light and stuff like that. So I'll give you guys a few different tips and tricks for night. And excuse me while I go get rid of that sun. I'll be right back. And just like that, you can Thanos snap the sun right out of the sky by the end of this course. Nah, I'm just kidding, guys. But there are a few key principles that we're going to pay attention to now that we've lost our main key light, which is the sun. So obviously you can see this shot here now ended up being really darked out, and a lot of my face is just kind of smothered in shadow. But that's something you can kind of use to your advantage at nighttime, is just letting the shadows and the darkness kind of engulf things a bit, and you don't have to overlight everything if you don't have the means to do so. A really important principle in filmmaking is lighting the space and not the face. So in this case, you can see I'm kind of doing that here with the back of that fence, and that's actually being lit by an iPhone light that's sitting on a tripod off to the side, and it's creating shadows against the plants and stuff like that, and that's just giving a little bit of scenery and something going on in the background. And then since that light is over on that side, what I've done is I've taken a little magnetic tube light and I've put it up in the awning sort of at a diagonal behind my head a bit, sort of similar to where the sun was positioned earlier in the daytime shot. And it's giving me the same effect that that sun would be giving me in the day, but now it's much more pronounced and contrasty, because that's the only portion of the frame that's really well lit, is sort of the back of my head here and my shoulders over here, whereas this side is kind of all shadow and darkness. And again, that's something you can use to your advantage, is don't be afraid to let things just get black and get really dark, because that really caters to a nice cinematic look a lot of the time. It's much better to do that and just kind of let things fall into being far too underexposed and let the face kind of fall into darkness on one side. That's better than sort of over brightening everything or cranking the ISO up to 6,000 or something like that. You really want to avoid things like that. And when you just have no practical lights in the scene, and a practical light would be if there was some type of sconce or light or something hanging from my fence and giving an actual light in the frame that you could see, that would be considered a practical light, and that'd be off in the background. It would look really pretty and really nice, but unfortunately we don't have one in this case. But if I did have one, let's say right here off to my right shoulder, then what I would do is probably put my key light over to that side of my face, so it looked like the light was almost casting and hitting the back of my head from that light on the fence. Now, like I was describing earlier, since I have the little iPhone light over there lighting the fence and sort of the background, it just made sense to me to sort of put the key light on that same side, because it kind of wouldn't make sense if the light source in the frame was coming from that side, that this side of my body would be lit up. So I kind of moved things over, so my key light and my shoulder little rim light over here was on the proportionate side relative to where the fence light is. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on the rules of lighting and stuff like that, because there's going to be an entire dedicated video of the course that just goes over lighting, what lights you guys should get, how to use them, and what situations to use them in. But in terms of just knowing what to do when the nighttime strikes and you want to roll your film camera, all you really need to do is get one light to isolate your subject. It doesn't have to be directly on their face, although I could put it in front of me and sort of have a front key light situation going on. I think it looks much more moody and aesthetic to sort of let the face be dark and just sort of have that rim light at the edge of the face on one side. It caters to a much more dramatic looking image compared to just lighting the face directly. And ideally, like I said, I would have some type of practical lighting going on in the background just to add some life to the background and not have everything just be complete blackness on one side. But when you can't avoid that, you can't avoid that. And it is what it is. You kind of have to let things fall into darkness, like I said, rather than overexposing and cranking the ISO way too far up. Like we were going over earlier in this episode and also in episode 4, the ISO plays a huge part in your exposure, but if you crank it way too high up, you're going to introduce lots of noise and grain into your footage. Now, going back to that base or native ISO number, once you find that on your camera, you want to stick to it for the most part, but at nighttime, you're going to have to probably crank it up a bit. If you have a more consumer-friendly camera and it only has one ISO number, something like 400 or 200, that's the native number, I wouldn't recommend cranking the ISO any higher than 16 or 3200 max in most situations. Any higher than that with those kind of cameras and you're going to introduce way too much noise and artifacts to the image. It's not going to look professional. Again, don't be afraid to have things be really underexposed on that exposure meter in the nighttime and make that sacrifice of not having too much grain or noise. A little bit is okay, but like I said, avoid going over 16 or 3200. Now, if you have a camera like me with two ISO numbers, the first one might be something like 400, and my second base ISO is all the way up at 3200. So that means I can put it up to 3200, in some cases a little bit higher, and really not introduce that much noise into the shot. Now, that's what my ISO is at right now. I'm at 3200. I have my aperture all the way wide open back to 2.8, and of course I've removed the ND filter because we no longer need sunglasses on our camera when there's no sun. So although a lot of this side of the shot is really dark, if I were to crank the ISO higher to something like 4,000, 8,000, which my camera can go up to, it would introduce way too much noise and the shot would look really unprofessional. And other than that, there's really not much difference to lighting your scene at night compared to the daytime. Really just the rules that you want to pay attention to is open your aperture as much as it can go down to 1.8, 2.8, and use the lens that obviously will give you the most wide open aperture for the least amount of grain, because then you won't be forced to crank your ISO as high as you would on a lens that doesn't go as open. And at the end of the day, you really only need one light on your subject, and for a more contrasty sort of dark type of vibe, go for a rim light. Put that light sort of similar where you would have the sun in the day, sort of off to the side behind the subject, not quite lighting their face directly from the front. Although you can do that if you want the person to be seen, if you want things to not feel as dramatic, or if you're doing an interview, for example, or some type of corporate work in a nighttime situation. You might not want to have things be too darkened, and they might want to have certain logos or faces be very prominent in the shot, and you can light things according to their requests. Practical lights are super important. Do not underestimate practical lighting. The only sort of thing that I have similar to a practical light right now is the background light that I have, but that would be, again, considered a background light, not a practical, because you can't actually see the light source itself. You just see the actual light it's casting. If I did have some type of practical, you would see, again, like a sconce or something on the fence. Usually a nice warm tungsten orangey type of look. Looks really great for the practicals. And then for your key lighting and stuff like that, you have a cooler sort of 5600 degree Kelvin. But again, we'll get deeper into those things in the lighting episode. Also, if you're in a situation where you're filming in the car or you're out and about just filming and shooting, you're looking for a nice location, use the practical lighting that's actually provided by those locations. If you're in a city type of location, there's lighting everywhere. So you can get really creative and position yourself, you know, relative to those lights and get some really cool looking shots. In a street style scenario, you can use the lights from street lamps or from buildings and stuff like that and have it cast sort of like a spotlight on your subject, which also looks really cool. And then you just have sort of like a black dark void going on behind them and sort of like a nice spotlight being cast on your subject. And another great rule that's really gonna help you guys is use checkerboarding in your shots, whether it's daytime or nighttime, especially at sunset or right after sunset. This is where you can really take advantage of checkerboarding in your shots. And what is checkerboarding? That just means you're gonna have a lot of different pockets of both light and dark scattered all throughout the frame, basically as much as possible. You don't have to be too strategic about, you know, where those pockets are being placed and stuff like that. As long as you play the right game of, you know, putting your subject in the right spot that's most cinematic based on the angle you're taking. We talked about all that stuff earlier in the episode. All you really wanna do is have a lot of variation of, okay, this little pocket of the frame is kind of black and shadowy, and this one is highlights and lights. The more sort of like scattered and checkerboarded you can have that sequence of dark light throughout the frame, the more natural and appealing it's just gonna look to the eyes. Now, you don't always have to shoot for as much checkerboarding as possible. That's just sort of what works really well in nature, in forests and stuff like that. It works really well. Any sort of natural environment where you're outdoors, you're getting a nice wide shot, checkerboarding is a super important key. But for a more medium shot like this, or something where you're framing just an individual that's talking, nice front and center, again, you just want to use one light, maybe two lights, three lights, but you don't have tons of checkerboarding going on. You might just have one side that's darker, one side that's lighter, or you might have sort of like a diagonal light dark pattern going on. You guys can play around with that and sort of create different pockets and sort of quadrants of light and shadow within the frame. But you definitely don't want to just have it be all one, all shadow or all light. That's going to look really bad. If I were to shut that light off, obviously you guys can't see anything at all. You guys can see the fence lit up back there, but that's it. There's no ambiance, there's no nothing. And if I were to crank my ISO up any further, obviously it's just going to fall into complete noise and grain. And even if I were to have no noise in the shot, there would be just a flat, dark image. There's really no variation of light and dark. And now you guys can see just how much of a difference that one little tube light makes. So that's really all I have for you guys for the outdoor filming episode. A lot more of it we're gonna get into in the lighting episode, as well as the next episode, which again is gonna go over indoor filming. We'll carry over a lot of these same foundations and principles indoors and use them as well. But for the most part, as of right now, you guys are ready to just get out and start experimenting with your cameras. You guys should know how to set up the settings and get your proper exposure and things like that. And with all the tips that we covered in this very long episode, you guys should be good to go to start recording.